President Donald Trump wants the U.S. Supreme Court to allow him to fire the head of a federal agency that exists to protect whistleblowers. Trump tried to fire the leader of the Office of Special Counsel, Hampton Dellinger. Dellinger argued that Trump doesn't have the power to do so, and a judge temporarily blocked Mr. Trump's move. So now the president wants the Supreme Court to back him. We are watching that one closely, and because we are, let's bring in CBS News legal contributor Jessica Levinson. Good to have you with me, Jessica. The big question at hand here: does President Trump really have the power, the authority to fire the head of that government watchdog agency?
Right. And this is the first big case that the Supreme Court is going to hear on this question. I think I'd like to point out two things. One, if you just zoom out, we're going to be seeing this pattern again, right? So the Trump administration takes an action. It's challenged in lower court. The lower court judge says, hold on, pause. And the Trump administration files an emergency appeal to the Supreme Court saying, help me out here. I have the power to do X. Now, in this case, X is firing the head of the Office of Special Counsel, as you said, a watchdog agency. And the question is really, specifically under this federal law, in order to fire the head, do you have to point to bad job performance? Now, his argument, the counter argument to the Trump administration is, in the email firing me, you didn't point to any job performance issues, so you were outside the bounds of your power here.
So what's in it for the president? Why does he want the guy fired in the first place?
Well, I think what we've seen is briefly, a vast reconfiguration, a vast reimagination of the federal government. And what we have also seen is a pattern of firing people in watchdog positions. So, Reed, I think we talked about the inspector generals being fired. In my mind, this is consistent with the theme of not just vastly reducing the federal workforce, but also reducing those people who are in watchdog positions. So
say the Supreme Court says that Donald Trump can't do what Donald Trump wants to do. Does he have to do what the Supreme Court says?
Well, that's how our system is set up. And I mean, you've really very quickly gone to the heart of the issue, which is we hear a lot about this question of, is there a constitutional crisis? I will say my personal view is there is a constitutional crisis if the Trump administration or any other presidential administration looks at a Supreme Court decision and says, no, thank you. We're not there yet. Right now, what the Trump administration is doing is appealing. That's being part of the system, saying, I don't agree with what a lower court judge said, and now I'm going to the Supreme Court. But the Supreme Court has no army. They have no ability other than issuing an order of contempt to make sure that people comply with their orders.
We're also watching a judge today hearing arguments over a challenge to the authority of Elon Musk and Doge, or his Department of Government Efficiency. What do we expect to come out of that hearing today, Jessica?
So this is Judge Tanya Chutkan, and if that name sounds familiar, it's because she was the judge who was overseeing the D.C. election interference case that was pending against President Trump. Right now, I believe the early reporting is that she seems skeptical of the state's arguments. And again, the states are the ones challenging Elon Musk and Doge and their actions, that she seems somewhat skeptical that there is an immediate harm to the states. The reporting indicates that she's saying, I'm going to issue a temporary restraining order soon, and that she wants to see exactly how many people have been fired from the federal government. Briefly, something she's going to be looking at is whether or not Elon Musk is in a position that, frankly, needed to be a position that was confirmed by the Senate, meaning whether or not somebody who's unelected and has not been confirmed by the Senate has the power to do what he's doing. And then separately, there are concerns about Doge's access to a lot of information, a lot of sensitive information, a lot of personnel information, social security numbers, et cetera.
So I also want to ask you about this because it got a lot of headlines at the end of the week, over the weekend. Federal prosecutors moved to drop those corruption charges against New York City Mayor Eric Adams. We saw people protesting and walking off the job in response to this. Is this a done deal for the people who want to see Adams' case continue in the courts?
So the Department of Justice still needs leave from the court. Under the federal rules of criminal procedure, a court still has to bless the dismissal of charges. What we also know from decades of Supreme Court precedent is that judges typically defer to prosecutors to the Department of Justice when they come to the judge and say, we want to drop this case. Now, this is Judge Dale Ho. He can, who is appointed by President Biden, he can kick the tires here, Reed, meaning he can have a robust hearing about whether or not the dismissal is within the public's interest. He does have the power to say no. Again, Supreme Court precedent tells him defer to what the Department of Justice says, but I will say it's extremely rare for a judge to say, I'm sorry, no, you cannot drop these charges, you must continue.
Extremely rare, but these days anything can happen, and that's why it's always so good to talk to you, my friend. I'm just going to tell corporate right now, let's get you a little studio apartment inside the studio. You're not allowed to leave or to sleep. Jessica Levinson, thank you so much for talking to us.